Dr. Santos-2022 and I have been kind of joined together in this process of being educators and mothers at the same time, and learning how to integrate that into being counselors, and then thinking about how that transcends all of our identities, because it's such a core part of all of this. So I'm so excited to be here and talk to you all about something that I think is super fun, and really helpful. So looking forward to it today.
Perfect. Let me share my screen very much. And you have heard from me for a while, so just in case, Dr. Syntia Santos-2022, co-founder and co-director of the Latinx Institute, and also an assistant professor here at Antioch. So very happy to be here and share with you a little bit of our conversations. So Dr. Corey, do you want to let us get started?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, go ahead.
So today I want to sort of, I think we could probably jump to the first slide.
Right.
I don't have the con for the slide changing.
There you go.
There we go. All right. So today we're really going to talk a little bit about how we might utilize this film. But first, really how we might utilize film in general. Thinking about ways that we can integrate film into the work we're doing with our clients, and how it can really help us to connect to our clients and to address difficult issues, to help folks explore things that might be challenging. And we're also going to talk a little bit about how that looks based on our different identities, and how we even came to having this conversation. So hopefully that will be helpful for everybody.
Sorry, I thought I was muted. Of course I'm not. Sorry about that. And I do want to say that I hope that everybody have seen this movie, because we're talking about this movie. And if not, I highly, highly recommend it. And we're going to talk about the movie itself, but I'm also in general about films and how to use them in counseling, and how can we to really utilize them in a way that help us make connection too. So so you can get to learn a lot of other things, but it will be really great if you have seen it, and if not, please do so. It's a really good movie. All right. So I think I just want to start with the story of us talking, and it has been very interesting about just how we came across just even thinking about doing a presentation or doing anything regarding this topic. And it was very interesting. We always talk about our lives and our us being moms, apart from being counselor educators, being counselors, and working with families and children at some point in our lives. And when this movie came out, it was, I think we were just texting each other. It's like, oh, have you seen this? Have you seen this music? Have you done this? Like, what are your kids saying about it? Or how are we responding to it? And it was so interesting to be able to just get together and talk about it, and have all that conversation around it, and what it meant for us and for our families, and know that there were a lot of things that we were feeling connected through this movie, as families, as people, as women, as mothers. And so with that end, we thought there is something here that we can think of. We can actually go more in depth and go beyond. It's a pretty movie. That really, really getting to know what was in there that was important in general. So that was my experience, and it was so good. I mean, to me, talking about being a mom, you don't really get too much spaces on that, unfortunately, and surprisingly. You don't get too many people for you to kind of sit with that and sit with you on that process of being a mom. So having conversations with Ali has always been important for me, and just a part of almost like a self-care kind of feeling and healing process as well of what that means. So having that space is really important. And in this case, through this film, it was also a very important connection to my own culture. I was born and raised in Honduras, now living in the United States, become a mom in the United States, a culture that I don't fully know and understand. I have been here for years, but being a mom in the United States is something that I had no clue. I still don't have a clue for. And so it has been interesting just to have these conversations and these reactions And that was brought up through this movie. So Ali, I don't know, how was your experience?
Yeah, I mean, exactly. I mean, I think that's it. We sort of had these conversations as at first it's just two friends and two moms just talking about it and recognizing that it was sort of on repeat in both of our homes and what that meant and what that looked like. And then sort of almost backing out of it and thinking about it from an academic standpoint, thinking about it from a clinical standpoint. So it was sort of interesting the way we sort of came to this of, wait a minute, I'm guessing other people are having this experience. I'm hoping maybe other people are having these conversations. And if not, then we need to be. And so that's sort of how we came here and ended up doing this. Gosh, I think we started this about a year ago now, Syntia. So and I think some of that, part of it as we sort of backed out, is that we started thinking about this impact of film, just in general, really, how film is such a representation of culture, of the culture we exist in. If you think about how children and adults emulate the actors and actresses and the characters that they see in these films, how they become some of these ideas of what we think we want to be or should be or how we should act. Pop culture becomes this thing that everybody wants to be part of in some ways. And I know Disney has been a part of my life since I can first remember. It was the first movies that I ever watched. And they were always these characters that were sort of untouchable, unreachable, these princesses in the big castles and, you know, or royalty. Heck, even when you look at Lion King, it's about the royalty in the movie. And so it was sort of this piece of how Disney has impacted the way I sort of even understood myself, you know, the damsel in distress who needed to be rescued and, you know, the loss of a parent, which happens at the beginning of a lot of those films. It's very strange and sort of traumatic. And just really, then we were sort of talking about how Disney has shifted and how we've started to see in general sort of these baby steps towards inclusivity, right, Syntia? Like suddenly we're seeing that it isn't just Aurora in the Sleeping Beauty and Cinderella in the castle. So I think that was what kind of started to come to us. It's like something's changing here, and there's space for us to do something with this.
Yeah, and again, we want to be clear that we're not there yet, and that's why we're very, very clear to add baby steps because this is not nearly enough for what it is, but it is a really clear sign in terms of where society is right now. And now hearing you say all of that, Ali, I keep thinking of, yeah, I grew up with these movies too, in Spanish, in Honduras, with a lot of things that had nothing to do with my culture at all. Like I remember growing up thinking on a white Christmas, there is no snow in Honduras ever in any part of the country at all. I have never even touched the snow or know what it is or where it came from. I mean, the first time I saw it was in my master's in Buffalo, New York. And I was like a kid in a candy store, just looking at the snow, and I was in my master's degree. So just to mention how the impact of these movies that are coming to us, no matter where we are in the world, and knowing that there is a huge disconnection between what they are showing and how they're showing and where they're coming from in terms of culture and what are the recipients of that information are. And definitely, again, knowing all those stereotypes that are putting out there, that have been putting out there forever in society, especially particularly for girls, just because when you see white skin, blonde, blue eyes, women, that they have been deemed like the beauty or the most important beauty measure in our lives forever. So seeing these shifts has been very interesting, and I think has awakened a lot of reactions in terms of, oh yeah, that's right, and that connection on, like for me, like looking at this movie in particularly, the music is so important to me, and it's the type of music, it's my music. I love them. I know this music, and so for me, it's kind of, yeah, sure, that's my music. But I know for many people in the United States, that's the first time they ever hear it. know it or seen anything related to that or those colors or those clothes or whatever it is. So very interesting to put it out there and see those reactions in terms of, for me, it was like, oh, that's so pretty, and I know it, versus I have no idea what's going on, but let me see. And because Disney is the one branding this and sending it to the entire world, and so that impact of that is so great, so amazing that it's interesting to see that. And I do know that they are doing a little bit more research, that they are trying a little bit of more of hiring actors and actresses that are native from that culture. And that's happening not just in this movie, but, you know, Coco, then we did, what's the other? The Princess and the Frog, talking about New Orleans and African-American culture. And so there are many films that have been moving a little more, Moana, talking about Hawaii too. So just kind of moving away from the stereotypes and kind of even challenging themselves on exploring other areas of culture and other signs of culture, if that makes sense. So those baby steps are important. We need more. And again, we need to include more people, more places, more topics, more art, more meaning behind what we're doing. And for me, showing different perspectives is also very important. Because again, like if we think about what is showing in, especially in, like right now in this movie, that does not represent all Latin American cultures, right?
Right.
So that's important to know that there is more out there to be said. And there is that, again, being cautious of not saying, oh, all Latin American people are like this person. And so a lot of work there to be done.
So one of the things as we start to think about this a little bit more is what's sort of the history behind using film as a counseling tool. Cinema therapy has actually been around as a tool for quite a while. I really like this sort of definition of it as being an expressive, sensory-based therapy that uses movies and TV show episodes, videos, and animation as therapeutic tools for growth and healing. I know I've used it in the school counseling work that I have done. I've used it with my younger kids, and I always thought about it to utilize for children and adolescents because it was a way to sort of engage with them a little bit differently. But I suddenly, my eyes have kind of been open to this idea, like this could really work with adults too. This is really a way to connect with adults on different levels as well. As Syntia and I talked about how much her and I were connecting to this movie. I just watched it again on Saturday and was crying at the end again. I mean, how much impact like these things still have on us as adults. I don't know if the rest of you had that experience watching it, but and so the research behind this, it goes back 4 decades. We really recognize that this can be effective with multiple populations in different settings, outpatient, residential, psychiatric hospitals, nursing homes, schools, you name it, and the cinema therapy tool can be effective in those spaces. That it's really appealing to clients because it engages all of their senses sort of at the same time. I do too. I do. I cry every time I hear it. And actually my children call surface pressure mommy's song. When we get in the car, can you put mommy's song on? Which I don't know how to take that maybe, but well, that's something we can get to later. But this idea of like how we end up so engrossed in these films and so entrenched in what's happening in them for us, it really creates a way for us to process things beyond just words and conversation, because it impacts us in lots of different ways. So I think it's really cool to think about how we might utilize this in session, how we could utilize it as homework assignments for folks between sessions, and really how we might just integrate it into the way we're talking about different topics, or as a way to broach topics that we might not have before. So we'll talk a little bit about that as that applies directly to Encanto as we go forward.
And I think I also did. Am I in the same slide or the next one?
Yes, go ahead to the next one, I think.
Okay, so, all right. It's not working. So anyways, I also wanted to say that this can be used just for on personal reflection too. This can be some sort of an opportunity for you to get immersed in other aspects of different cultures too. Again, obviously, it's not like going and actually talking to somebody, but it kind of gives you an opportunity to kind of give you a space for you to think and reflect. I know we have been using films for counselor education too, just to learn and to use different perspectives, to see different characters as clients as well, and just kind of to think about how can we support if that was a real person a real client, what will we be doing or helping with or supporting with, or what are things that come up for us of our own way of, if that's the person that is in front of us that is different from us, what will be my reaction towards this? And I think that's a big theme in this symposium too, of so what do you do if that's that reaction? And I think even for me, like I remember saying something about with Ali in our conversation, oh yeah, I'm dancing with this movie all the time. I mean, and I get up from the sofa and dance with my 2-year-old and just dance around and move her around. And nowadays she actually wants me to carry her and dance with her in my arms, which is so exhausting, but she loves it. And we both have that connection and that way of communicating and dancing and following the music. And I said that being very aware that that's my music, right? When I said it, I was really proud. And it's like, oh yeah, I'm dancing in the living room, in the kitchen, just following this music. And Ali said, me too, dancing with my kid too. And I guess I wasn't expecting that. I don't know why. Like, yeah, it's not your music, but sure, okay, cool that you're dancing with that. You know what I mean? It was an interesting moment of self-reflection of, wow, why didn't I expect that? Why didn't I expect that you will be dancing too with your kids, even from a different cultural background? So very good to have a way of bringing conversation together too, through these through films, and any film that we have that we are using for those type of purposes.
And I think it's really interesting to consider how engaging with film, both as educators and as counselors, it helps us to think about ways that we can connect with folks of different identities without putting the emotional labor on those folks, right? Mm-hmm. So if we can utilize film as case study, or utilize film as ways to consider different cultures, different identities, then we're able to sort of dig into these characters, because there's such depth to so many of these characters, without having to place the emotional and the labor of that on the folks that we might try to connect to in those ways. So I think that's such a huge piece of this. And Syntia, I was laughing. I was thinking about that connection you and I both made, that was really interesting how surprising it was, because I do this. I'm dancing with my 3-year-old through the kitchen with her in my arms, singing these songs. And suddenly I think for both of us, we were like, wow. So even though we come from such different places, even though we look so completely different, right, from the outside, we're having this really similar experience with our daughters. And sort of as this conversation went on, we found so many places where we connected in different ways that were sort of unexpected, and we're able to process some differences that were really cool too. So I think as we look at this slide, we've talked a little bit already about the connection to the movie and the Disney brand and some of our positionality there. And then I think the other part was sort of the tough topics that this movie tackled that were so surprising to me as I turned it on the first time. I sort of knew we were going to get an opportunity to engage with Latinx culture and really be able to see something so different than, what I was watching in Frozen, because that was the other movie we had on repeat for way too long. But I was so blown away by the grief and loss, the identity development, the intergenerational trauma that was so evident in this film. And I thought, wow, Disney, like finally, like you're getting into some of the stuff here that really felt very unique to this film. And really just such a cool opportunity to talk about some of these things that might be really difficult to broach in counseling sessions, especially if your identities are different in ways that might make thinking through some of these topics a bit more challenging too. Mm-hmm.
For sure. And I think for me, it's just very interesting to bring up things that I have even talked about these things since I was in my master's, especially when I was going through my PhD. and people still didn't get it. I was like, what are you talking about? And having a movie that we can relate to, that I can say, well, have you seen that? At least, at some sort of idea, kind of similar to that, it will be helpful moving forward, to be honest. Because, for example, that picture that is out right now in your screen is a great representation of Honduras in my head. Like, I'm used to see that type of families. I'm used to seeing everyone with different skin colors. My family has different skin colors. My immediate family have different skin colors. And that is so weird in the United States. You are either this or that. And if you're not, you have to figure it out. And if you're not, you don't belong to somebody, or somebody will tell you where you belong or not. And it's so hard for me. That has been one of the hardest things for me to figure out and know that we don't do that. Like that types of scenarios in Honduras is not the same. And that's not to say that we don't have white supremacy. White supremacy is everywhere. That picture of beauty, as I said, the white, blue-eyed, blonde, even if it's not in the whole country, that's not what you see in the whole country, it still is deemed as more beautiful than anything else. But having that scenario of this is a family, that's how a family looks like in Latin America, around many countries in Latin America.
And that they're all living under one roof, Syntia, right? They're all living under one roof, which is so different than what we see a lot of the times here in the States, especially within the white supremacist culture that's so individualistic. Sure. They all, that group of different folks all living in the same space is weird for many people here.
And with different challenges, but also with different talents and with different contributions, not just to the family, but also to the community around them. So that sense of family, that sense of connection, that sense of community is really important. And again, it's so difficult for me to explain that to others. Like, it's so difficult for me to tell them that's the reality and the norm for us. This is not weird for us. This is what we do. We take care of each other, we talk to each other, we support each other, and we challenge each other in ways that probably sometimes we shouldn't, but that's what happens. So having an opportunity of making a connection, a real connection with some of these things in this way, kind of, it feels safer, and it feels like I can use it as an example, or I can give more context to what I'm trying to say without even getting too more in depth onto too personal in some things. And it kind of become a little bit less aggressive of not me trying to defend myself, but me trying to show you this is a different way of doing things, and this is a different way of living and being as a cultural being as well.
So I think one of the things that I want to kind of mention as we move through this is how we had this conversation. So we really set out when we first set up we just had a conversation. We sort of, and that worked for Syntia and I, right? We just sort of sat down and said, like, let's actually talk about it. Let's talk about Bruno. Let's talk about Encanto. Let's talk about the film. And what sort of happened, I would imagine, could be a parallel process for what might happen for you with your clients, or what might happen for you with your students if you're an educator. And so we sort of spent time together just unpacking it. What did you see? What stood out for you? What was really like powerful? What impacts did that have on you? And then we sort of co-created, like, okay, what does that mean? Now, what do we do with that, with what we saw? What work might we want to do moving forward from this space? And so there was this unpacking, and then this recreating, this co-creation of kind of the next steps from the film that happened as we were having that conversation.
And I do want to add that conversation was a lot. So that unpacking in this movie is tremendous. There is so many things, and I think we have more than one conversation, and every time we talk, we have different angles and different perspectives and different things that we notice, and also different things that we have heard out there in the media as well. So that has been very interesting to know how the media is approaching this too, and what are the messages that they are putting emphasis on that are moving along and moving around the people. I also think that it's interesting to see how this is received by the audience. Again, still, we find a lot of connections between Ali and I, and we're two different people from different cultural backgrounds. And still, there are some things that are different in the way that we receive the messages and in the way that we react towards the messages. As I was saying, things that are, for me, the fact that people in our countries keep feeding you and giving you food is just normal. Here you go. Right. Have an arepa. Keep eating that. That's good and healthy. And this is what we do to heal people, is to eat most of the time. So just things like that were very important, and unpacking different pieces of this film took a lot of energy, a lot of space, and a lot of emotion. So I know Ali was saying, I cried at the end of the movie. And the thing is, it's not just it's not just a superficial cry. There is a lot of pieces of this movie where they bring up a lot of yourself and a lot of what's happening in your life, a lot of your family scenarios and dynamics. So there is a lot to it if you allow yourself to do that, and if you allow the time for processing and unpacking. And by the way, Ali and I both have some background in schools and working with children, and how important it is for us to recognize that as a counselor, to be able to think about these as a movie that you could use, that is not any movie that you present, especially in the schools. How are the people in the school, how are our children going to react to that? And I think many times we don't think about those things. Right. It's like, it's a movie for children. It's better for children to watch. Fine. But this is a lot of things going on in this movie that it really, really means for this to be processed, for this to be talked about, for you to sit down with your children. That is within your family, within the school setting, within your counseling arena. If this is happening and this is what they are seeing, there is a lot in there for us to talk about. Yep. All right. And I think the last thing on this conversation is definitely Bruno. So there is a lot of pieces of this movie as well, that and that's a whole thing and a whole theme in this movie. And there is a song about it if you haven't heard it, that talks about Bruno, and that nobody talks about this person, that is ignoring this piece of information. This huge character in the movie is meant to not be spoken of about. So that was another big piece of this movie, that both Bruno and Maribel were kind of the outcasts, and the different ones, the ones that were not a major character, that they were not the perfect, pretty picture of beauty, the perfect, pretty picture of talented, and the most normal talent in that family, or the most wanted gift, were not the ones that they had, period. And that was completely different and new in movies for me. That was like, oh, wow, that's not, they are not the ones with the superpowers that everybody wants. They didn't have invisibility. They are not the ones flying. They were not the ones strong enough to move cars or trucks. So, but they have different talents that were just as or even more important than many of the other characters in the movie. So it's very important to think about that and to unpack those things and bring it to conversation.
And I think that was even one of our critiques at the end of the movie, was sort of, wait, but we still never really talked about Bruno. Like, even in the end, we still somehow managed not to really talk about him. And you'll see, even in this picture, he's not even represented here in the family, right? So I think that was the other piece of like, okay, that's the next step as counselors we even want to take, is I think we still need to have this conversation. What does this mean? We need to talk about Bruno. The hug at the end where you bring him back into the family might not be enough, right? So how do we really talk about Bruno?
Mm-hmm. And that the depth of that, how do you go more in depth? And obviously this is a movie, but in general, this is not going to be solved with a song. It's not going to be solved with an arepa. It's not going to be solved with just a hug. Like, what is underneath all this history and all the story that unveiled? That is, that how do you actually connect with each other? How do we want to transmit messages and communication within the family and outside the family? And that connection to the community was very, very strong in this movie too. So how do we share and support each other and build each other up, knowing that there is work to do within, internally within that family dynamics? in a space.
So we're going to take a couple of slides and just talk a little bit about the themes that seem to emerge from our conversation, and really thinking about how that might help us consider what might come out if we were to utilize this in counseling, if we were to utilize this in teaching. I mean, in all honesty, this is even conversations I've had with my family of like, who do you connect to? What came out of this film for you? Which character do you think you are in this film? Is a conversation my sister and I have had. So I think this really, for me, transcends even farther from just the clinical practice, but also how might you utilize this film to have some difficult conversations in any of the spaces in your life, in a way that's approachable and kind of applicable in ways that are really different. So, Syntia, do you want to start us off here with this one?
Yeah, and I think we start with something that we have been talking about from the beginning, and just that difference between a collectivistic versus an individualistic culture. And it's very obvious in this film how interconnected the family is, what the family dynamics is showing, and that connection with the community as well, how important it was for them to be part of that community and for that community to be connected to them as well, to this family specifically. And so very important to start thinking about how all of that was revealed in the film and showcased in the film. And again, for me, how normal that was for me versus a person that is individualistic. And I have had tons of conversations about things that are normal for me. And then I have the pushback of others. Like, again, even as a student, like saying, I talk to my family once a week, every week. And for many people, it's like, why? Or holidays. We have holidays coming up soon. So like for me to hear people saying in this country, oh, yes, I have to go and see my family. It's so painful. Every time I hear that, it's so painful. And I know where you're coming from, and I know it's hard. I know it's challenging. I know that the second day you're there, you're like, oh, you want to leave. I know it. And I probably feel a little bit the same way. But that's something I will never say. It will never come out of my mind. I don't want to go home. Right. And home is always home. Home is always Honduras, in general, in my mind. So having those feelings and even talking to my partner about it too, because he's from here. And so just kind of going back and forth and seeing like, well, do you actually want to do this? And I want to do this, but my wants are almost like a need and expectation. And I know that not going is hurting my family too. And it's hurting my dad, for example. So just kind of having those conversations and see that being a collectivistic culture means a lot in terms of who I am, but also means a lot in a way that I'm connecting to people here in this space and my connection to you as a counselor, if you are my counselor. Okay.
It was also interesting, Syntia. One of the things that came up when we were talking, in my family dynamic, my mom actually does live with us. We do have actually 3 generations of folks living in my home. But that's really different than any of my kids' friends. None of the rest of them have, their grandparents living in the home with them, or really that like enmeshed. I don't want to say enmeshed, but because that word has a lot of bad connotations, but just really engaged in our family life all around. And so this even gave me a space to say, like, here, like, this is actually really kind of the norm in other spaces. Just because it isn't here around your friends and the people you're seeing doesn't mean that it's not the norm in other cultures. Like, so it gave me a space to sort of help my kiddos think about the fact that family doesn't necessarily just mean mom, dad, and the kids in the home. So I thought that was really neat.
True. And it doesn't have to be good or bad either.
Right.
That's the other big thing, that it doesn't have to be right or wrong. And I think we need to start walking away from that, because that's the message that is received, that is not just different, but it's wrong if you don't do it this way. So very important to kind of bring that up as well. And I know I'm looking at the time, so we're going to kind of move, we talk a lot. We can talk about this for months, you all, but we are going to try to move a little faster. So one of the other big things that show up in this conversation and in this movie is spirituality. and the way that it's showing up. And it was interesting because I saw the movie both in English and in Spanish, and I saw different ways of using the words, and the words that they are using are a little bit different. They mean a little bit different things for me if I hear it in Spanish or in English. But it's still, there is a lot of points in that movie, especially the title, Encanto, and what does that mean? And it's very interesting because that could be seen as like a charmed thing. It could be seen like something coming from a Santeria place. It could be something good or something bad. It could be like a miracle, and they use the word miracle too. So from my background in the Catholic Church, a long time ago, you need to say miracle instead of Encanto. It will be much better for you to actually talk about miracle, coming directly from God, that an enchantment kind of thing. So very interesting to talk about that. And then that representation of that something was given to you, given to this family, something that they have to treasure, something that was pulled in them together and keeping them together somehow and giving them strength. So there is a lot of metaphors in this story that represent that center of spirituality, the lights, the candles. Like there is a lot of metaphors and a lot of symbols utilized that are usually utilized within my culture, within our Latinx culture, but they are also showing different cultures too. So very interesting to kind of bring that up in terms, if you're thinking about indigenous people, indigenous healing, if you think about African American descent or Afro descent people, we also have Afro descent people in Honduras too, by the way. So there is a lot of different things that come through the spirituality lens within this movie as well.
The next piece that we started talking about a little bit was the socioeconomic status piece. And actually that conversation emerged for us as we started talking about the clothing in the movie and what we were noticing about the clothing in the movie. And Syntia at first was talking about the colors and the fabrics and the feeling and the sort of tapestry of the clothing that folks were wearing. And then as we sort of shifted, it was this idea that it was homemade, that you could even see the threads in the clothes if you really paid attention to the film. And I sort of was like, yeah, that was really neat for me, because growing up, my mom did make our clothes. My mom did used to sew for us. We grew up without being able to go, all of our clothes were their hand-me-downs or made for us. And so I wasn't that princess in the tower who was getting her gown put on her by the fancy birds that sang and talked to her. It was just a very different thing to see, okay, like these people, even as they're very important in their town, you didn't see a vast socioeconomic status difference between them and the other people living in the village they were living in. And so it was just, there was some approachability, some ability to connect to these characters that felt really different than I had ever seen before in a film like this.
And again, for me, and I know I'm putting myself out there here, but because the other thing that I was not expecting you to say that ever, that your mom will sew something for you, because I grew up with this image of the United States of the best and better brands of anything and everything are here. And everything is cheaper in the United States. And if you're there, you can buy everything you want in the world, and everything is going to be better than homemade, better than clothes that I will wear. I mean, we use uniforms that were always homemade somewhere, to go to school. So that to me was like a wake-up call of, I have no idea. I didn't know for sure. And I was not expecting that ever. And that also bring up other things like generations. And so how different your generation was to what's happening now with kids nowadays. And if that makes a difference between the socioeconomics of the person that you're talking with.
Mm-hmm. And so I think that piece of us realizing, wow, so as I am learning about this culture that Syntia identifies as hers, she was also having these moments where she was learning a bit about my culture too, and a bit about who I was just as an individual, and not the assumptions we had both made about each other and each other's culture by utilizing this film as a place to start from. It was a safe space to have these conversations that we maybe never would have had otherwise. And so it was so cool to me to see that happening for both of us, because I sort of walked into this thinking how much I was going to get to learn. And it was neat to see that there was some reciprocity in that conversation for both of us. The big one for me that always has jumped out in this film has been the gender roles and my absolute love for Luisa. And I was so excited when I heard that Disney had totally screwed up and made too many of, her name just left me.
Maribel?
No.
No. Isabella.
Yep. Too many of her and not enough Luisa. They didn't expect that little girls were going to want Luisa dolls and Luisa merchandise. And I thought, wow, like how cool is that our little girls are wanting this strong character versus this pretty princess. But in the end, I think what really came out for us is how much, in some ways, this film showed us the expected gender roles, but really challenged a lot of those in many ways and helped us to think about spaces where we could maybe have those conversations. Isabella didn't want to get married, but she was going to do it because that was the right thing to do for her family. Luisa didn't want to be strong all the time, but she felt like she had to carry everybody's load. Abuela thought that the only way to keep her family together was to preserve their gifts and to focus on their gifts, but she lost opportunities to connect with them. And so there was this idea of different ways that the women were supposed to be strong and different ways they were supposed to sort of hold everybody together. And then how were we challenging those? How are we having those conversations? And we could have spent an entire session, honestly, I think, talking just about each of these themes.
Yes.
So I hope that you'll take these pieces and go have these conversations. What came up for you? What was there? But that one just jumped out to me so much as I watched this film, for sure.
Yeah, just get some popcorn and go sit down, watch the movie again, and keep talking because there is a lot to say here for sure. And the other thing that to me was important was just the challenges, that the feeling of this movie challenged some of these gender roles too, and putting out there some other perspective. So I know Isabella has a moment of I have to be perfect, and so a moment of I don't want to. What if I don't want to be perfect? What if I want to make things that are not perfect and it's still beautiful and it's still different? So that to me was one of the most amazing movies of that time, because nobody will think and say, oh, she's suffering for something because she's perfect. So her life should be perfect because she is following the norms of beauty and perfection. But she said, what if I don't want to do that or be that or represent that? That's really important. And the other piece of it is for Luisa, because within the family, still, even if she didn't want to be strong all the time, I do feel that she was accepted the way she was within the family, that nobody was talking about her as not being pretty or not being feminine enough or not being allowed to, or not looking good because she was wearing a dress. Or I was looking at the way that that character moves and dance, and I'm like, oh, go Luisa, yes. Because you expect like this curvy, pretty, beautiful Latina with long hair dancing in a specific way. But she's like, she knows what she's doing. She knows how to dance in this movie. And those are really, really challenging expectations and labels and stereotypes. And I love that from that movie perspective.
Yeah. I think the next one, the idea around family dynamics, I think we've talked actually a lot about that as we've sort of made our way through this. But I think even just the basic question of tell me about the character that appeals to you or that you connect to. And then tell me about how do some of the dynamics you're seeing, the way this family acts with each other, what ways might you connect to that? What ways might that be similar to things you've seen in your family? What ways might that not be similar at all to things you've seen in your family? And I think that question can just open such a depth and breadth of responses and just really create a really cool way to talk about the film in general. And then finally, I think this intergenerational trauma that becomes such a big piece of the whole thread underneath the movie, and how it really comes out there in the end when Abuela finally really talks and admits, maybe honors the pain that she has had, and allows her granddaughter to see that pain that she had experienced. But then the impact of ignoring that for so long, of someone, running away from the family because they weren't accepted, because it wasn't good enough. It wasn't what was expected of them. And sort of this denial of like, oh, we don't talk about Bruno, right? We don't talk about what's gone wrong. And even Abuela didn't talk about what happened that led to her gift. She simply said, when we lost your grandfather, we were given this gift. Mm-hmm. There wasn't this other piece of like what really happened there. Right. And the pain that had left her in.
All right, so we ran out of time because we love talking. But I hope that you have just kind of get a sense of what we're trying to say, the themes that came up from this movie, the way that you can utilize that. And we have been talking about it throughout, just to make connections with the film, to connect to the culture, in this case, the Latinx culture, in different ways from different perspectives, and having that space to, quote unquote, safe space to explore different aspects of the culture, but also in terms of even race, oppression, discrimination, and traumatic experiences as well. So just kind of ways of how to utilize that aspects of films. And I'm trying to go super fast here, sorry about that. And just also that remembering this opportunity to bring back things to social justice and advocacy in terms of representation, empowerment, opportunities to have conversations and get knowledge to other people, normalizing the things that you're seeing as, it's normal to be this type of family. It's normal to look different, to be different. It's normal to speak Spanish. Hello. It is normal to be exposed to different things and try different things and being part of who you are as well. And I think that representation piece, if you haven't, you can see a lot of things in social media, just talking about how kids are amazed of being able to find a character that looks like them. That made me cry. And just kind of seeing their reaction and seeing that's me, that looks like me, those curls, those pictures, those colors, those whatevers. So using these as an opportunity for social justice and advocacy is really important. And again, that opportunity to think about the outcasts and the things, the unspoken things and unspoken rules, it's really important as well in our lives.